Hello, and welcome to the Read the Bible podcast. This is a resource from Imago Dei Church. My name is DJ. I'll be your host, along with my wonderful, beautiful wife, Crista, who is also going to be helping us lead through this discussion. Crista, can you believe this is episode 6 already?
Oh, that's fun.
We're 6 episodes in.
That's awesome.
To be honest, did you think we would make it to 6 episodes?
I didn't know if you would, but I thought I would. Yeah.
Fair enough. As Ecclesiastes, like anyone can start something, but who can see something through?
Yeah, right. Who could finish it? We're doing it, Deej.
I'm honestly incredible at starting things. And I married you to help me see things through.
That's right.
That's
we're
how
a good team.
Yeah. If it wasn't for me, I don't know that you would start anything.
And if it wasn't for me, I don't think you'd finish anything you started.
I love you, babe. So good. So glad to be doing this again with you. We're starting a new month. Just, Crista, here's a question. We're just letting people into our life a little bit. How was your shower this morning?
So my shower was awful.
Yes.
So for those of you, it's the whole thing. But we just had our bathroom remodeled.
Yeah, we've gone our whole time living in our house with a shower that like drips water on you.
Yes.
It doesn't spray water on you. It just kind of like
sprinkles. Yeah, it just drops. So we've been living in our house for 8 years.
About that.
Is that right?
7.
8 years?
7.
Mm-hmm. And my favorite story is that when Mark and Cassandra Medina house sat for us, that Cassandra actually drove to her home in Whittier, and we live in
That's
Downey.
Like 300 miles away.
She would drive home, to shower because our shower was so bad. So we've always had low water pressure. And
so we finally got the water pressure fixed.
Yeah,
and then the water heater broke.
Yeah.
So now we're
we just fixed our bathroom, and we finally had water pressure, and it's like as much lukewarm water as you can imagine. We have, because our water heater is gone out. So
anyway, I like throwing questions at Crista that she's completely unprepared for. We have our notes in front of us of what we're going to talk about, but I like to keep you on the edge of your seat, babe.
Exactly.
So, okay, with that being said, let's dive in. We're here to do the Read the Bible podcast, not talk about our shower habits. The purpose of this podcast is, as a community, we've put out this resource of a Bible reading plan. We want people to be, diving deep into different books of the Bible each month. Actually, rewind that even just a little bit. We want people to be reading the Bible, just like plain and simple. If I can convince you to do anything, read the scriptures. We hear God's voice through it. We learn how to discern God's voice. We uncover salvation through the scriptures. God has given us his word as part of the way that we commune with him. And it is how we know what is true and not true as we walk with him. And so if you are following Jesus and not reading the Bible as part of your life, you're missing out, and you're really kind of like hurting yourself in that journey. And so what we've been doing is there's a resource, and you can find this on our website under the Connect tab, the Read the Bible, and it has a Bible reading plan and also a sheet on how to study the Bible if that's new for you. If the Bible can sometimes be an intimidating thing to step into. And we've been bouncing around different books of the Bible, trying to show in the scriptures, there's all different types of genres. There's different ways that God has given us his word. And so we're launching something new today as we enter the month of May. Crista, what are we reading? And tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah. So this month we are going back to the Old Testament, and we're jumping into the book of 1 Samuel.
Okay. 1 Samuel.
Yeah.
Now, we just finished Galatians and 1 Thessalonians.
Yes.
So without getting into all the details yet of 1 Samuel, how is 1 Samuel different than Galatians or 1 Thessalonians?
Yeah. So we talked last month about how Galatians and 1 Thessalonians, those are what we call epistles. They are letters written to the early church in the New Testament. 1 Samuel is a different genre of literature in the scriptures. And so 1 Samuel is a historical narrative, what we would call a historical narrative.
Let's pause right there. Let's talk about genre. I don't know if we've ever just had a 2-minute breakdown on this.
Yeah.
Why is genre, it's a funny word, why is that important to know when it comes to reading the Bible?
Yeah. So genre is important because it helps you have a better understanding of how you should be reading what you're reading. So, for example, if I go to see a movie and I know I'm going to be watching a rom-com, I am far more likely to laugh at jokes because I'm going in with the expectation of, okay, this is a comedy. I can laugh at these things. If I go to watch a drama and I come with that same mindset of a comedy
Mm-hmm.
and I'm laughing at parts that I should not be laughing at, or
Yeah.
serious moments, I'm not understanding what's happening, or vice versa. And so when you understand the genre that you're reading, it puts you in the mindset and the framework of really how to interpret and how to understand what the author is trying to communicate.
Yeah. I remember when I would teach this, you can go on YouTube, just Google like Seinfeld thriller, like, how was it? Seinfeld thriller cut or something like that. And it's pretty much taking the comedy of Seinfeld, but edited in such a way to make it look like a trailer for like a thriller or like a suspenseful, like horror movie. And it's, if you take certain elements, like genre is part of how we interpret what's happening in a scene. We understand what we're kind of walking into. And so you could look at, like you said, there might be comedic things that because we are knowing that it's a comedy, we're laughing at that. But if we didn't know it was a comedy, there might be like actually really tragic or really weird or really, and so how you're understanding even what it is helps you interpret
what's happening. What you're walking away with.
Exactly. And that's so when it comes to like poetry, you understand, oh, these are pictures, or these are not everything in like poetry, for instance, is meant to be taken literally. Right. So talk to me though, 1 Samuel, you says historical narrative.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about what that genre is and how we can understand that and other genres.
Yeah. So historical narrative is one of the easiest genres to read because it is storytelling. It's a narrative. And Crista has a book. There you go, DJ. Thank you. It's called Literarily, which is a recommended resource for this podcast. This book just goes over what the different genres are in scripture and how that helps you interpret as you read.
I want to, I'm imagining, obviously you can watch this on YouTube. I'm also imagining people listening to this podcast and just trying to type out Anya.
Yes, her last name.
Yeah, and making wild guesses.
Crista Anna Weeble. But the book is called Literarily.
Mm-hmm.
And she has this great picture that I think is helpful with historical narratives. She says that historical narratives, it's like a mirror and a window. And so they can act as a mirror, where as you're reading, you can see yourself in the people and the characters that you're reading about. And they help you see what your life is like through the lives that people lived, because these were real people struggling with the same things that we struggle with: life, death, sadness, joy, all those sorts of things. Also, it's like a window through which you can look through and watch people's lives. And as you observe, you are learning about who God is, how they live. Like, you're getting a glimpse of things that you can learn from their mistakes, from their successes, from their stories that you can maybe hold and take to your own life. But the biggest point, though, of historical narrative, so it could be a mirror, it could be a window, but in all things, which is what we always want to prioritize as we read, is when you're reading a narrative story. So you should always ask yourself, how does this story fit in to the big story of what God has been doing for all time? How does this singular story fit into the big story of what God has been doing for all time? Mainly what God's been doing to redeem his creation through the finished work of Christ. And how does this point to my longing for Jesus? How does this point to our human need for a savior? And so that's something that we just want you to keep in the back of your mind as you read through 1 Samuel. How do these stories fit into the big story of what God is doing? And do you see a mirror of your own life, or are you able to look through a window and learn and glean things that you could take to your own life as well?
That's incredibly important, Crista, because I think, and I'll share in a bit how this fits into the storyline of the Bible, but that's incredibly important to realize that when we say historical narrative, it's not mere history.
Right.
It's not a journalistic account of what happened. And I think that's sometimes when we approach some of the history narratives in the Old Testament, that's the mindset we bring into it, whether that's 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, Chronicles. we imagine a journalist describing what happened, and we're just, reading the newspaper, so to speak.
Just these facts.
But no, it's historical narrative. Yes, it's telling, but it is telling history from a certain agenda, from a certain angle. Now that might be language that puts people on edge. Like, no, it's from God's agenda. It's from God's angle. It's from his viewpoint of the world. I remember, this isn't for Samuel, this is more in the King's books, but I remember in seminary learning about the Battle of Karkar. And that's one of my favorite history lessons I've ever learned is, you should research this, the Battle of Karkar, Q-A-R. And there was just this massive battle that happened in antiquity, where there was an army that was kind of coming. I forget. I think it was Assyrian. I might be wrong, so don't quote me on that one. But that was just conquering over and over, and a bunch of different nations gathered together to fight and push back and win the day and push back this conquering empire. And Israel was one of the main leaders of these gathering of nations that helped push this back and helped win this, decisive battle in Karkar. And you find no mention of this in the Bible. It's well attested in history. You can find all sorts of documents and things about this in history, and the Bible does not mention the Battle of Karkar at all. And the reason why is that the king from Israel who led that was King Ahab, and who was one of Israel's most wicked kings. And so the accounts in these stories are not meant to just tell a history of Israel.
Right.
It's not a journalistic account. It's God's angle. It's God's agenda. He's telling us the true history of what has happened and how we ought to understand it in light of all that God has done.
Yeah.
So then, Crista, I said I would, but since I just talked for a minute, why don't I throw it to you, and I can go back. Help us understand. Maybe we could just together.
Sure.
How does this fit into the larger story of the Bible?
Yeah. So if you have been reading through the Bible with us, you might have read through Exodus, which we did. I think that was February that we did Exodus. So 1 Samuel, really, it picks up with the nation of Israel. So in Exodus, you have the Israelites, who are God's chosen people. God made a covenant with Abraham in Genesis. He says, hey, Abraham, your descendants, your offspring, they're going to be my people, and I will be your God. You'll be my people. These people are in slavery in Exodus. Moses comes, they get through the Red Sea, and then they have 40 years in the wilderness. And so after the wilderness, Moses passes the baton to Joshua. Joshua takes the Israelites into Canaan, the promised land. And Joshua is leading the Israelites in Canaan. And then after Joshua, he passes the baton in a sense, but the judges take over. This is the book of Judges in your Bible, where God calls different men and women to help lead, to help judge the nation of Israel, kind of just to call them back to, hey, remember God's law, remember God's ways, we are God's people, let's keep doing it, guys. They would judge what was right and wrong for the nations.
And so maybe one of the key things I would highlight within that is you have them entering into this promised land that God has given them. Joshua leads them. Joshua shows the kind of the conquest of that land. But then in Judges, you have this phrase of the people did what was right in their own eyes.
Right.
And there's a generation that forgot God. And there's this kind of downward spiral throughout the book of Judges as sin is still at work in the people of Israel. And they do not fully have conquest of that land. And so then there's this reality of living not as God's completely purified people in this land of blessing. And then this is where we find ourselves in Samuel, is what does it look like now that Israel is amongst the other nations, and how do they live and respond and walk through that from here on out? Right. So, Chris, maybe someone's first time reading for Samuel, they're excited about, okay, we got story time with some of the historical narratives, and there are some really cool, interesting stories, and this is where you're going to find David and Goliath is here. I mean, just a classic, right? A lot of cool stories. Actually, what are some of the cool stories? Because that's not a question here. You can find David and Goliath. What else are you going to find?
David and Goliath. Samuel? Yeah. I mean, David and Goliath, Bible's top hits. I don't know, but that's definitely up there. So you'll find that one. The story of Samuel's birth is a big one. Hannah, who was barren, and First Samuel opens with the story of Hannah, who cannot conceive a child, and God miraculously gives her a son, Samuel, and that is a beautiful story. It's a great way. I love that it's just at the beginning of the book. It's really sweet. So that's a great one. And then you have, I mean, there's all kinds of interesting stories.
yeah.
Some of those are in my fun facts. So I
Okay,
kind of
wanna
want to
save
save
that?
some of those. Yeah.
We'll save it then.
But-
Okay, let's push forward.
Yeah.
Let's talk about big themes.
Yeah.
Because I have a story that I'm like wanted to tell, but
Is it one of mine or is it
I
your own?
didn't read your notes.
Oh,
So
of course not.
I'm
No,
not
it's
sure.
good.
So
We'll find out.
we'll find out. Let's talk about themes that are in here, because I think this is really kind of key as people are entering into First Samuel. What should they be looking for? What are
Right.
some of the themes?
Yeah. So I'm going to go a little out of order of what
Mhm.
we've talked about here because I want to save a couple for the end. But one of the themes that you will find in First Samuel is a theme of transition. There is transition throughout the book. So as I said, it starts with the story of Hannah, and she gives birth to a son named Samuel. And so the first transition that happens is that you have this man named Eli, who is a priest in Israel. His sons are just mocking God. They are eating the food of the holy food of the tabernacle. They are sleeping with women who are attending in the tabernacle. They're just defaming the name of the Lord. And so God removes Eli and his sons from that position and transitions it to Samuel, who is a man who leads people in the way of the Lord. Samuel, then there's a transition from Samuel's leadership to the King Saul, who is the first king of Israel. So First Samuel is primarily, talks a lot about establishing God's kings, but there's that transition from Samuel to Saul. And then finally, Saul, when he is gone, his transition then is to King David. So you just see a lot of kind of passing the baton, that God removes people from power, from position of influence that are not honoring, they're rejecting God and his ways, and transitioning in men who are who fear the Lord.
Yeah, so it's this transition, like you said, from Eli to Samuel, from Samuel to Saul,
To
and
Saul
then
to David.
to David.
Mhm.
And putting this into context, David becomes, between First Samuel and Second Samuel, kind of the idyllic picture of a king, and that as we get to Jesus, that
Right.
Jesus fulfills and is in the line of David, and that becomes important. We'll
Right.
share about that more. This is showing the transition from this kind of judge's moment where everyone did what was right in their own eyes, to God bringing about things so that his kingdom can be established.
Right.
Awesome. What else can we expect to find?
Yeah. Another thing that you're going to notice, you'll see this a lot, especially right off the bat, just as you start, but that God is a God who doesn't work the way that the world works. And so you're going to notice a big theme is that God exalts the humble, that God calls and raises up men and women who are the least of those, who are not considered to be of much significance. And so you see that in the very beginning. There's Hannah, who is a wife, and then I forget, her husband's name is Elkanah. Is that right?
Get it, babe. Good
So
job.
Hannah is a wife of Elkanah, and Elkanah has another wife named Peninnah.
Mhm.
And Peninnah has tons of kids, and Peninnah just mocks Hannah, like, look at all the babies I have. Why can't you have kids? She's just a thorn in her side. But God sees Hannah and he exalts her. He gives her not just Samuel, but after Samuel, the Lord provides many children for Hannah. And then you also see that God raises up King Saul. Even it was a Benjamite, which was the least of the tribes. He was hiding in the luggage when Samuel's looking for him to anoint him as king. So he's not like some brave, bold, obvious choice. He's the coward in the luggage of the smallest tribe. And then God, of course, anoints David to be king, who is the smallest of his brothers, the shepherd boy. His dad doesn't even call him to meet the prophet Samuel. Samuel comes, tells his dad, Jesse, hey, one of your sons is going to be king. Jesse lines up all his sons and doesn't even bother to call David in from the fields. Like his own dad doesn't even think, well, it can't be David.
That's jacked.
But God sees David and he exalts him. And so that's a beautiful thing that we see of God's heart and his character, that God sees the lowly and he exalts the humble in heart.
Yeah, and that's captured beautifully, I think, in Hannah's prayer. She says, the bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble bind on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry have ceased to hunger. That's the hope, is that God exalts the humble. You know what, Krista? You know, no matter what we're doing, at least we're better parents than Jesse. You know, like he just straight up forgot.
Just turned David away.
You know, just
didn't expect much
didn't
from
expect
that
much
one.
from him. Left him out. Just maybe even just forgot he was there. I don't know. Well, anyway, okay. So that's a key theme, and I think if you don't see that, and I would argue that's a theme throughout the whole scriptures. Jesus and his teaching picks up on that, that God exalts the humble.
Yeah, Jesus even said, if you want to be the greatest, you must be the least. This is the way of God's kingdom.
Yeah, because what God is in search of, and this is a theme in 1 Samuel, is he's in search of a man after his own heart.
Right.
You know, someone who desires his heart and his way. And like you said, that is often not the way of the world. That's not in the eyes of, okay, we want the tallest, the strongest, the most wealthy, the most powerful, and yet you see the shepherd boy take down the giant. You see, I mean, there's this theme over and over again of like God raises up. It's God's strength. It's God's power, and God gets the glory through our weakness, not through our strength. Yeah. And we often get that so backwards. Yeah. Okay, I see. You wrote down a couple other things. What else can we expect to find?
So just two other themes. One, this is the biggest theme in 1 Samuel, and then I'll quickly touch on this last theme. But the biggest theme in 1 Samuel, we can find this in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 30. So early on, God says this himself. He is speaking to, he rejects Eli. This is the priest who has the sons who are just, I was going to use a word, but I don't think it's a real word. His sons.
Half your vocabulary.
Yeah, half my vocabulary is made up words. But Eli and his sons were just ignoring the holiness of God. And
what's the word?
I don't know. I don't want to say it if it's the wrong word. Was defaming? Is that the right word? Defame? That's a word, right?
Sure.
Sometimes I'm not that confident. I get my words mixed up. But they were defaming the name of the Lord. Anyway. Samuel 2, verse 30, this is what God says. The Lord declares, for those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. And that really sums up all of 1 Samuel, is that the Lord sees, and so those who honor God, those who fear the Lord, those who walk in his ways, God will honor them, and he will care for them. He will exalt them like he's got your back, you know. And those who despise the Lord will lightly esteem. If you reject God, God is going to reject you. God cannot be mocked. And no matter what position you have or how powerful you are, even if you're the king, if you reject God and his ways, God will reject you. And he will bring in somebody who honors him and who fears him.
Yeah, like you said, this is a theme all throughout 1 Samuel with Peninnah.
Peninnah?
Peninnah?
That's how I say it. I don't know.
Yeah. Peninnah, and Hannah, Eli, for Samuel, Saul, and David, which real quick going back. As long as you say something with confidence, like you're going to be fine. Yeah. But that's a trick for you. If you're ever reading the Bible publicly and you come across a name you don't know.
Just say it quick and fast.
Confidence.
And confident. Yeah.
Peninnah. There we go.
That's it right there.
And every Hebrew scholar listening to this podcast is like shaking their head. But okay. But my question is, we're listening out these things and we're seeing this as a theme. And honestly, this is a theme in 1 Samuel. I would argue this is throughout the Old Testament, throughout the Bible, right? And I think it gets confusing for us as a church that preaches the gospel, where sometimes we think, okay, is that a works-based salvation? Is that like does this contradict grace somehow to say that those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me, I will be lightly esteemed. I think about the prosperity gospel that's at work in our area, which is health and wealth, but it's not just health and wealth. It's saying, if you obey, then I will do this. And the reason why your life is struggling is because you did not obey the Lord, you know? And so when we hear this, is that correct? You know, when we read that verse and we're saying that's a theme, how do we understand that in light of grace?
Yeah. Well, I think what's helpful as you read 1 Samuel, right, when we say God will honor who honors him. And there is this mindset, especially like you mentioned, DJ, in our culture, in our local church culture that we've been brought up in of like, if I obey, then God will bless. If I obey, God will bless. And so what do I do if I obey God, but I don't feel like God is blessing me? And I think the question is, what is it you want from God? What is that blessing? And when you look at 1 Samuel and you read, especially about, it's primarily about David, and Saul, but when you look at David's life, David is a man who is, it says he's a man after God's own heart. God says, I will raise up for myself a king, who is after my heart. And so David honors the Lord and God honors him. But David was running for his life. He was starving. He was we'll find he was depressed. He was anxious. He was in a tough spot. And so David didn't have everything going for him. It's not like he had this picture perfect life. Yeah. But what David did have, which you'll find in 1 Samuel, is he had the Lord. He had God by his side, and he had a sure hope of his future. He was anointed king. God promised he would be king. And so in all of his turmoil and his hard times, he trusted God with his future. That even though I'm going through this now, I have the Lord and I have this sure hope of what God has promised to come. And that's what we have as believers, is that when I honor the Lord, I obey the Lord, and my hope is not that God is going to give me everything I want, but my hope is that God is with me and that God has promised me eternity. I'm a co-heir with Christ. Like, this is what I have to look forward to. And God, so that's the first thing I would say to answer that. And then the second thing is, God is the creator of this world. And there is a rhythm and there is a flow to this world. And so God's commands go with the way that he created it. And so when we walk in God's commands, when we walk in his ways, it is for our good.
Totally.
Like this is what wisdom literature speaks to. This is what you see throughout scriptures. This is what we see in just people we know who follow the Lord, is that I was young and now I am old, yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken. The righteous are never forsaken by God. Even though they experience deep grief, deep pain, deep suffering, they are taken care of. Yeah,
so you're walking this kind of nuanced roads. Let me just repeat back, maybe add a little kind of flavor to what you just said. Even looking at David as a very specific example, that fool wrote most of the Psalms.
Yes.
Right? He's the king. I should call him,
King David.
King David,
DJ.
not that fool.
That's right.
He wrote most of the Psalms. And yet most of the Psalms are lament Psalms.
Right.
God, where are you? God,
right. My tears have been my food day and night.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what's coming out of his heart when he's writing. And yet 1 Samuel is also showing the Lord honoring him. And so we need to understand that the honor of God, or the blessing of God, is not always going to compute into material blessings. And so that's one place where the prosperity gospel would distort a verse or an idea, like, those who honor me, I will honor. Right. That the blessing that God gives, what we always kind of say is ultimately himself. Like that is the blessing that we are pursuing, is the promise of walking with God, of being with God. And the hope is not in this moment right here, but it's where he's leading us. Psalm 23, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. If we stretch out over all the scriptures, it's, I'll wipe away every tear from your eyes. And you know what I mean? Like that is where we're headed to. That's the ultimate goal. The second thing, like you said, is there's sort of the wisdom literature. There is a grain to the world, like that there is a way that God has created the world to work. And so, yes, following God will lead to a better life.
Yeah.
And we should not be ashamed about saying that, or like that's not weird. And I think if anyone ever heard us interpreted what we were saying when we kind of go against a prosperity gospel, I think you'd be overstepping that God has like a way that we're meant to live. He made us to be human beings and he wants us to flourish. And so we should find that we flourish when we follow him, that our marriages are healthier, and our children are being raised and stuff like that. But it doesn't mean they're without sorrow. Right. It does. And I think that's the key thing. And this might step into the last theme that you want to get to, is I think it overestimates our ability to actually do these things. And I think it's not that is the Bible at one level does have a prosperity gospel. That might sound crazy, considering how much I preach and teach against that. But at one level, it's actually a pretty straightforward, like, do this and it will go well with you.
Right.
And I think we completely overestimate our ability to do this.
Right.
And then we miss that no, every good thing we have is not because I did it and God owes me.
Right.
No, what God owes me is judgment.
Right.
So every good thing I have is grace.
Exactly.
So, and that might take us to this kind of last theme that you wrote down. I have it. God requires complete obedience from Israel's king. That is what he calls them to. That is what we are unable to give.
Right.
Bring us into that.
Yeah, I mean, we'll just touch on this briefly, but this is a huge theme in 1 Samuel is God expects the king of Israel to give him complete obedience and allegiance. And so when Saul fails to be obedient to God, God says, I will raise up for myself a king who is after my own heart. And he raises up King David. And you see throughout 1 Samuel that David is noble. He is obedient to the ways of God. Whenever Saul fails, David is like, he's just the better one, like he knows what is right. And that's not to say that King David was perfect, because if you read 2 Samuel, you'll find David has egregious sins that he falls into and commits. But the fact that Israel needs a king who is completely obedient to God, and even David, who was considered to be the best of the best, even he fell short. And so it leads us just to that reality and that longing of that Jesus is the king who is fully obedient. And so when you see Saul's failure and when you see even King David's success, that it would remind you that the one king that God requires who could be fully obedient is Jesus, and that is where our hope is found.
That's so good, babe. Well, let's use that to lead us into just some kind of reflection questions before we close down. Just last things as people can expect, they can be looking out for as they begin this journey. What are some things that might surprise people about this book? What are some things that you're passionate about, that you love about 1 Samuel? Take us into that, because you've done a lot of work putting some kind of sample questions together. You're a month ahead of the rest of the church right now. Right. So give us a little bit of a foresight, a scouting report.
Sure. Yeah. So some things that are surprising about 1 Samuel, even though I know humans are sinful, I'm still surprised by the sin. And so for me, I'm just like, Saul is surprised. Like anything Saul does, I'm just like, dude, like what? Yeah. Like, and Saul is all over the place. I mean, he's
a tragic character.
He really is.
It's actually hard not to like him as you read it.
There is an empathy, or like it's a broken heart where you're just like, dude, like Saul, like, come on. And you can almost hear in some of his dialogue and in the stories that he wants to do what's right. He goes back and forth between bless you, David, and then I will kill you, David, and I will bless you. And it's just, he goes back and forth from honoring God and I want to do what God says, and then no, I'm going to do my own thing. And it's just, it's sad. And it is just, again, this is the mirror that we might see. Hopefully we're not, as true to Saul, but that's where we talk about that mirror in the window of one, you might see yourself and Saul, man, I just keep going back and forth between wanting to honor God and not. Or you might see in that window and just like, no, I don't want to be like that. I want to be all in. I want complete obedience. And so anyway, Saul is a tragic character, and it's hard to read, what's going on with him.
What about something that you love that you're looking forward to people seeing? Maybe not a theme necessarily, but something that just stands out to you.
Well, for me, I love history, just period. And so whenever I read historical narratives, I get a little bit giddy because it's fun. And so when I read 1 Samuel, I told this to DJ. I don't know if this is entirely true, but I always imagine that I'm watching like a Lord of the Rings movie. Now, there are Lord of the Rings fans out there that are bigger than I am, but when you read about David, I almost imagine like Aragorn, who's like the rightful king, but like he can't take his throne. And it's kind of like this, like, his band of brothers, and they're like, there's just like this, I don't know, what is it? This grit, like, to King David and to these kingdoms. And he's
ruddy.
Yes, that's the word. That was my favorite word when it describes David in First Samuel. It keeps saying that he's ready, and I was like, I love that. Like David's a
What does
ready man.
ready mean?
Ready means that. So when you do comprehension, look up words. It helps you. Ready means red in the cheeks. Usually it means like someone who's like just worked out or like did some hard
Oh,
labor.
I'm always ready.
Right. Yeah. So
Born ready.
David was a ready man. So.
Yeah.
Gotta love that. So I love the history. I love imagining what these scenes must have looked like. But big for me in this, as I love seeing God's sovereignty throughout this whole book, is I cannot tell you if you just look for it. Every chapter, God did this, God does this. And even when Saul or David or these characters, they think they're the ones doing things. And it's like, no, this is like all God. Yeah. Like God is the one who is establishing his nation. God is the one who is writing history. Like it's not men. It is God. And so look for the sovereignty of God. And it's just all over the pages.
Yeah, I think that's what you just said is just so key. I think if we read any of the Old Testament literature, so this is a good, going back to the beginning of our conversation, yes. 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, Esther, like anything that's like narrative. If you think it's the story of Samuel or the story of David or the story of Esther, you are probably misinterpreting
yes.
that passage. It's God's story.
It's God's story.
And it's his angle, and he's trying to tell and reveal something about himself. And so when you go to interpretation, an application, we don't want to be in spaces where we're saying, okay, how do I be like David?
Right.
How do I be like...
How do I not be Saul?
Yeah, exactly. It's more, we want to start with God-centered interpretation and God-centered application. What does this teach us about who God is, what he's done, how he moves, his heart, his character? Like that's where we want to be starting the questions, and that will help us lead to more faithful applications and understandings of what's happening here.
Yeah, it's good.
All right, let's end with my favorite part of our kind of intro to a book podcast is just going over some fun facts. I think
fun facts.
Anytime there's in the Bible is fun. I mean, there's all sorts of things to study and to see and to learn. Fun doesn't necessarily mean funny, although I am born ready. That was so good. And you just like moved right on past that. And I'm a little offended.
Born ready. Is that a joke?
Well, I feel like born ready, but it was like born ready.
Yeah, no, I didn't get that.
Right, anyway.
No, it wasn't that funny.
Okay. This podcast is over. It's been a great... Sorry, no. All right, let's talk some fun facts. What are some things, maybe I had mentioned earlier, some stories that might be here. What are some things that people can look for that are kind of just fun or funny or just random, but little insights?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is as fun, but Hannah's prayer is just beautiful. I love Hannah's prayer, chapter 2 of 1 Samuel. And Hannah's prayer contains so many of the themes of the whole book. So just get ready for that.
And that's another interpretation thing. If you see a song in the beginning of a book, it's probably giving you some themes. And what's cool is the book of Luke begins with Mary's song, and Mary's song borrows from Hannah's song. And so there's some of the same themes, like the low being exalted, that are in both of those places. And and what about a faithful king that is meant to reign? Huh. So there's some of those themes that are in those places. Okay, what else can we find?
Yeah, so another fun fact, I'm trying to think which one to share first, but...
Well, there's one that you wrote down that says, can I say that?
Can I, DJ?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this one I thought, it is fun. It's just like, again, I'm sorry, but I can't help but just imagining the scene of some of these stories. But you have in 1 Samuel 18, Saul promises David, hey, David, you can marry my daughter, Michal. And David's like, I don't know if I'm worthy to marry your daughter. He goes, okay. So Saul wants to get David killed. So he goes, hey, I know what to do. David, go and get me 100 foreskins of the Philistines.
Now, what is a foreskin?
DJ, what is a foreskin? This is why I can't do podcasts with you. But so Saul tells David, hey, go get me 100 foreskins of the Philistines, thinking that he's going to have David killed and be rid of him. So David goes and he gets 200 foreskins and he brings them back to Saul. And then he ends up marrying his daughter, Michal, and Saul's plan, is foiled. But I'm sorry. I just what is this scene? How do you, it just says this
That he
story.
got them.
He got 200 foreskins and brought them to King Saul. And I'm like, he brought them to like, what is like?
So you have to imagine. You have to imagine him like getting them. Which,
Right.
don't imagine too hard.
No,
That's
but
hilarious.
it's like one, like he goes with his men and he gets them. He
Yes.
acquires these
Like if you want to talk
foreskins.
about like winning a war,
Yes.
right? You want to talk about winning a battle.
Yeah.
Like, how did you just like die? Like, man, you won.
That's
if you're
like,
coming back with a foreskin.
I mean, that
and then the presentation of that.
exactly.
That's
I'm like,
hilarious.
does he just come in with the baskets? Like, I don't even. And the Bible is just like, so he goes and he gets 200 foreskins and he brings them to Saul. And I'm like, wait, hold on, what just happened? Like, because that's pretty gory and ridiculous.
Yeah.
So again, I'm like, I just tried to. I try to imagine these scenes, and that one kind of cracked me up.
It does crack you up. Although you think about it, now you just put in like the theological hats. It's like part of the mark of the people of God was
Right.
circumcision, and so it is this like mark of like victory. It is this
Yes.
mark of like
Yeah.
like there's things that
There
are
was a
happening in there.
purpose to it. It wasn't just brutality. Yes, there was
But
there was an idea to that. But anyway.
basically, read this with your middle schooler.
Yeah.
And there's something there. One of my favorite things is in I think it's chapter 3. Let me walk it back. When they lose in battle because you have Eli's sons are not following God. Eli's kind of a weak man who's not stepping up and leading his family, leading into righteousness. He's letting it go. And so they go into war and they fail. And the Ark of the Covenant, like the marker of God's presence is captured. That's how humiliating Israel's defeat is. But it's like, it makes this point, this goes to the sovereignty piece, that it is the Israelites that are defeated, not Yahweh, not God, because they capture the covenant. And it says in the next morning, the god Dagon, who is their god,
the Philistines
god, it falls over on its face in front of
the ark.
The ark with its arms cut off and its head cut off, like it's bowing before the ark. And it's just like, dude, God gets the victory even when the people don't. And it's also, again, hilarious, like God's victory there.
Yeah, I love it. It's so good. Last quick story that I think is a fun fact. So 1 Samuel is the prequel to 2 Samuel. So 1 and 2 Samuel, ideally, they're supposed to be, read together. They're a complete collection. But for the sake of this year's Bible reading, we're just doing 1 Samuel. But in chapter 20 of 1 Samuel, you have this story where there's David and Jonathan, who are just best friends. They love each other dearly. And Jonathan is Saul's son. And he knows that his dad is out to kill David, and Jonathan actually helps save David's life. But before David goes into hiding, they have this moment where Jonathan says to him, hey, David, I know God has called you to be king, and I love you. I want you to be king, but promise me that when you are the king, that you will look after my family, that you won't cut off my line. And David says, yeah, I promise. You're Jonathan. I got you. And then, so that's their promise as they make this covenant with one another. And in 2 Samuel, David makes good on his covenant. So Jonathan is dead, Saul is dead, David's king, he's been king for a while. And in 2 Samuel chapter 9, he finds that Jonathan has this son named Mephibosheth, who is, remember, you just say it confidently.
Yes, confidently, great.
Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth is Jonathan's son, and he is crippled. He actually has crippled feet, and so he that can't contribute anything to society. Like in this time, he's a worthless man, but David brings him into his own home. And
can you clarify? I mean, I know we're in a modern day, just that in terms
no. Yes, that's a cultural thing. Thank you, DJ. Yeah. No, culturally, like if you were crippled,
you should go back into like antiquity again. If you couldn't walk, if you could, then you had to be completely
you were the
cared
lowest
for.
of society,
exactly.
And you had very little dignity. Even Mephibosheth says of himself, "I am a dog." Like, why would you consider a dog like myself? Like there's
a whole cultural component to what you just said. Yeah,
exactly of that. No, that's good. Thank you for clarifying. I was trying to quickly get through this
I
story.
did too.
But anyway, David brings Mephibosheth into his own home. He restores to him the lands of King Saul and Jonathan, and he is taken care of. And he is honored and esteemed, and he lives the rest of his days with David's protection and David's honor. And so I think that's just beautiful to see that David followed through on that covenant to his friend Jonathan.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Lastly, for me, and I think for us together, there's a passage in 1 Samuel that holds just a dear spot in our heart, which was when we were first starting to plant Imago Dei. As many of you guys know, when we started, it was just Crista and I, and we were trying to gather a little bit of a team to help us get this off the ground. And we were really struggling and went through some low moments of feeling like we were alone in the journey, especially in those early days. And yet we felt compelled and called by God. Had a heart for Southeast LA and wanting to see people come to know Jesus. And I remember it was December 2014. We were at a gathering of some pastors, and someone read from 1 Samuel 14, and it just leapt off the page, grabbed my heart, and was an anchor. And it's Jonathan, the son of Saul. They're going into battle. They're outnumbered. And he says in verse 14, verse 6 says, "Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." And I think as we looked at what we had in that moment, there wasn't much. And we looked at the need and the army in a sense that was against us. And it felt like, oh gosh, what can we do? But nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. So I'm about to cough, so I'm going to throw it to you for recommended resources.
Sure, recommended resources. Yeah, we mentioned it earlier, but again, for the sake of it, Literarily by Crista and Weeble. If you're interested, just to have a good resource on Bible study tools. This is something I grab anytime I'm going to read a new book of the Bible. I grab this, I read the chapter on whatever genre I'm about to read. So if I'm going to read historical narrative or poetry, I just read that chapter real quick. Helps me get my mindset in what I'm about to read, helps me understand it. It's just good to have on your bookshelf. If you want to grow in your Bible study skills for life, I would put that in your collection.
And I think almost every podcast so far, we've recommended the For You series. I think Tim Chester writes the book on 1 Samuel in the For You series. And so that's if you're looking for some sort of study resource or a commentary. If you're new to using commentaries, if you're new to using study resources, it's really an introductory level. And yet also, so it's very accessible and yet also like doesn't leave things, hanging. Like there's some real good content, background, application that is in there to help you study. As always, we have the Bible reading plan on our website. You want to check that out, engage. Please leave a comment on YouTube or on the podcast. Like, let us know questions you might have. We want to continue tracking with you. This has been a joy so far to be doing with this. I want to encourage you, if you're new, to step into this and to read with it and to continue on. Crista, thank you so much for the work that you've put in to help get 1 Samuel ready for us.
Yeah.
And we'll be back in the middle of the month with hopefully being able to interview someone from our community on how they're enjoying 1 Samuel. But until next time, grace and peace.